Alright, it's about the middle of June here at Mountain Gardens, and we're looking at Siberian Ginseng, Eleutherococcus senticosus. A lot of people call it Eleuthero. The name used to be Acanthopanax senticosus, but now it's Eleutherococcus senticosus. So this is a shrub. The ginseng family has quite a lot of woody plants in it. Here's another one. This is ginseng family. Calopanax. Here's another one, also ginseng family. This big tall thing. But this is the one we're talking about. So it has, you can see the resemblance to ginseng. It has the spherical cluster of flowers, inflorescence. They're just blooming now. And it has the same palmate leaf with 5 leaflets that ginseng has. This is the plant that the word adaptogen was originally coined in conjunction with this plant. So this has been developed by the Russians as an adaptogenic tonic. They give it to people in high stress occupations, Olympic athletes, cosmonauts, that kind of thing, because it helps the body adapt to stress. So that quality of the herb was discovered by, I believe, a Bulgarian researcher who developed the rat swimming test, which is just what it sounds like. You throw a rat in the water and you time how long it can swim before it gives up, and then you do other rats and give them some of this first, and it turns out they can swim longer. So that is the first time a test was developed that could actually quantify the adaptogenic properties of the herb. So the researcher called it an adaptogen. Before that, up until the 60s, the American medical establishment was still considering ginseng to be a myth because they didn't have any test to prove that it could do anything. So in spite of the fact that millions of people have used it for thousands of years, it was just a myth to them. No test, and it must not work. But then they had a test, so they had to acknowledge that this plant actually does something. Actually, it's one of the most, well, ginseng is one of the most important medicinal herbs on earth, but this one is quite important as well. So as I said, there are a number of woody, shrubby plants in the ginseng family. Mostly, I believe, still called Acanthopanax. This one is the prickliest one of all. You can see the stem is just covered with spines, downward pointing spines, just thick, almost like fur. None of the others have that. The others have just a thorn here and a thorn there. They're all thorny in one way or another, but that's a very distinctive characteristic of Eleutherococcus senticosus. And here we can get a close-up of the flower as well. It's going to have black fruit and seeds. And I thought that once I had my own seeds, there'd be no problem. I could multiply this indefinitely. But in fact, I've had a fair amount of trouble germinating the seeds. I've tried it every which way, planting them fresh, letting them dry out, stratifying them. And every so often I'll get a nice batch of them to germinate, but not all that often. I still haven't figured out exactly what it needs to germinate. However, it can also be propagated by suckers, which pop up. When it gets to be a couple of years old, you start having runners come up. This was one that we tried to pot up, but we couldn't keep it alive. So you can see it was joined to this plant at the base. So we'll peel this and get the root bark off of it. So it's the root bark that is considered the medicinal part. However, I believe that everything on the market is just ground up roots. So if the root bark is the important part, then you're getting a lot of inert material in grinding up the whole root. And these roots in Siberia are quite huge. This plant grows as a continuous understory in the woods. So I have read, I've never been there, and it can get up to 20 feet tall. So a big trunk, a big tree. Well, not a big tree, an understory tree or large shrub. So the roots that are being dug up are pretty massive. So if they're just grinding that whole thing up instead of peeling it and using the bark, then you're getting probably a lot of inert material compared to what you could have if you grew your own. Let's see, I might mention another problem of this herb. If you do want to grow your own, you want to think about siting it. We have to wrap this thing up typically at least twice every spring. It's one of the first herbs to leaf out, and even though it comes from Siberia, it's totally tender at that stage. 30 degrees will completely defoliate it. Doesn't usually kill it, but it'll die back and it'll often not bloom that year because the bloom buds were out on the tips and they get killed. So it's a big pain in the neck, this plant. Wrapping it up, unwrapping it, wrapping it up again. If you live in an area where you don't have late frost, no problem. But around here, any time after the beginning of April, this thing can leaf out with the first warm spell, and we still got plenty of frost coming after that. Plenty of like 20 degrees. So think long and hard about where you want to put it. North side of a house, anywhere that would hold it back from blooming too early would be good. So there are several other species, as I mentioned. We have 5 or 6 different acanthopanax in my garden. This is called in Chinese Si Wu Jia, and that's fairly recent herb in the Chinese Materia Medica. Before that, they were all called Wu Jia Pi and used for wind damp. They're in the category of fight wind damp, which we would translate somewhat as rheumatism. But this one now, since the Russians did that work on it, this has been moved, this specific species has been moved out of Wu Jia Pi and into the tonify the qi category under the name of Si Wu Jia. So all the others are Wu Jia Pi, this one is Si Wu Jia, and this is rated as a qi tonic and a pretty important one. But it doesn't show up in any of the old traditional formulas because it's fairly recent under that name. So we'll look at a couple of the Wu Jia Pi species that we have here in the garden. Here's one right over here. So this one has thorns, but they're just here and there. This is a much bigger plant at this point in time. It looks like it's about 15 feet tall, and it can probably get taller than that. This is not far enough along the flower yet. There's the buds getting ready to open, the same round spherical inflorescence as characterizes the ginseng family. And it has a palmate leaf, though these leaves are mostly 3 rather than 5 on this particular species. I think some of them are 5. Most of them seem to be 3. I'm not sure what species this is. We've got, as I said, 5 or 6 of these, and I don't really trust the names that we got them under. Henryi, Devericata, and a couple of others. So we need to get a positive ID on them one of these days. So as I said, there are a number of related species to the Eleuthero. I believe they're still classified as acanthopanax. This one I'm calling Acanthopanax gracillostylus, Wu Jia Pi in Chinese medicine, and this was used primarily for wind damp conditions, which we would translate as probably rheumatism, that sort of thing. So you can see this one does not have flowers. It's got thorns. Every so often there's a thorn, a thorn, a thorn. And it's got the same palmate leaf, 5 leaflets, that's characteristic of the ginseng family that we saw on the Eleuthero. So this one is in all the Chinese herb books, Wu Jia Pi. Here's another one. So the Chinese used a lot of different species of this acanthopanax. Here's another one over here, probably used the same way. You can see it looks rather different, but it's still the same palmate, 5 leaflets. This one is just coming into bloom, so it's going to have the same round spherical inflorescence. There's one there. Here's one here that you can see, just getting started. So probably all these are used, traditionally were used as Wu Jia Pi. We've got 2 or 3 others in the garden whose identification I'm not sure of. I know what name I got them under, but I don't believe it. but they're all going to have the same tonic property. It's going to be the root bark in all cases that's used, the medicinal part.